Hey, this is Khan, you're watching Ninja Pulls. The Elder Scrolls Online's latest chapter, season, is coming in a few weeks. The new subclassing system has occupied most of our attention, but I also promised to give you guys a breakdown of exactly what new content is coming in Seasons of the Worm Cult and whether you should spend money on it. Now let's be real, I can't really answer that. That's just how you start a conversation on YouTube. What I can do is share my experience from the PTS, break down what's in the content pass and the type of player it's likely to appeal to. Spoiler free, of course. Chances are you already know whether you're gonna get this or not. But it's worth saying right away that so far, Seasons of the Worm Cult does not have a killer feature that players will need to stay up to date. There's no new class or system like Scribing last year, there's just subclassing, which is base game and free for everyone anyway. And so far, none of the new trial sets or mythics look like they're going to be particularly dominant going forward, which is cool. I mean, you want good sets, but you don't want a situation where players feel compelled to buy an entire chapter just for one gizmo that's going to keep them competitive. The only potential exception might be Rakat's Void Mantle, a new mythic which is very strong for heavy attack builds. Maybe that'll be a factor for some people. There is also the Writhing Wall event coming in the third quarter, where we break through into the next zone. That looks like a pretty big in-game event, and while everyone will be able to take part in some degree, to experience it fully, we will need the content pass. That adds some FOMO to the equation for sure, but that's months away. For now, the deciding factor is probably the content itself. For some of you, it's probably a shut up and take my money situation. You've already pre-ordered because you love ESO, and that's cool. I hope you enjoy it. Others will jump on board purely for the new trial and the new sets. Others will buy it simply for the story and the zone, and others may be happy to wait until it all comes to ESO Plus a year from now, which, by the way, ZOS have confirmed is what's going to happen. The content pass includes a new zone split into two halves, the first of which, Western Solstice, is coming in June, and the second, Eastern Solstice, in November or thereabouts. A new story, specifically a continuation of ESO's original story about the Plane Meld, the Worm Cult and Molag Bal, again, arriving in 2 installments. The new trial, Ossian Cage, should also arrive with Western Solstice on June 2nd. The content pass also includes ownership of both dungeon DLCs, Fallen Banners, which is already out, and Feast of Shadows coming in the third quarter. Of course, if you already have ESO Plus, you already have access to these, but with the content pass you'll own them in perpetuity as well, for whatever that's worth. And finally, both halves of the Solstice Zone contain all the usual delves, public dungeons, overworld bosses, and everything that normally fills a zone. In fact, existing players will probably find the content pass very familiar and very easy to understand, because it's practically identical to the chapters we've had for the last 7 years. Just spread across multiple smaller releases than one giant content drop. I should also clarify that like previous chapters, this is a permanent addition to the game. Apart from the Writhing Wall event, which we'll come back to in a minute, none of this is temporary. I think the terminology used by ZOS may have confused some people. The phrase content pass, carrying the connotations of a battle pass, or of seasonal content that will be removed for the next season. That is not what this is. The dungeons and both halves of the Solstice Zone will be a permanent part of the game, in the same way that Somerset was added 7 years ago and that hasn't gone anywhere. Start with the zone and the story. Solstice is comparable to previous chapter zones, like Westweald or High Isle. It's very pretty, and although it doesn't look vastly different from places we've been before in this game, the tropical island vibe is kind of fresh. You got sloths chilling on rocks, High Elven architecture, Argonians zooming around in canoes. It's basically a tropical paradise. The devs have done that thing where they build a gorgeous, restful setting as the stage for horrifying events, as the Worm Cult returns to the scene. It's not quite a Dead Island situation, that would be way too bleak even for ZOS. Most of the zone is away from the action and remains pretty chill, but it's the same kind of juxtaposition. Violence and evil in a place of natural beauty. Not super original or anything, but it's a pretty cool setup, I think. The story here is a continuation of the base game story, which, if you remember, begins with our character being killed by Manamako and his worm cult in a mass sacrifice. We awaken in Cold Harbor as the Vestige, escape back to Tamriel, and spend most of the base game teaming up with heroes all over the continent and beating the shit out of the Worm Cult wherever we find them. We ruin Manamako's stab at godhood and banish him to eternal torment before invading Cold Harbor with the guilds and kicking Molag Bal's ass as well. You can see why their followers might want revenge. Like I said, no spoilers, but I did play the story on PTS to make this video, and it does feel a bit different to be up against an old enemy and not some new faction. These Worm Cult creeps remember you, just as your allies do, and they've been plotting their revenge against you, against the guilds, and just against everyone for the failure of the plane meld. So although the story beats and quest structure are pretty familiar at this point, it does hit a little different this time. And if you're a lore nerd like me, there's some cool extra layers about the history of Solstice and why the Worm Cult chose this spot to stage their assault. And also the Coralania, the clan of elves who settled here to escape from their dark past. And if you were a bit disappointed that last year's story didn't do more to mark ESO's 10th anniversary, well, this is probably what you've been waiting for. Orsinium and Clockwork City are often held up as ESO's finest work when it comes to the big zone stories, probably because they use local matters and interesting characters to pull you in, rather than huge cosmic threats which don't tend to capture our attention or move the emotional needle in the same way. This ain't that. It is more of a grand threat type of story, but it does have a lot of familiar faces, which is fun if you've been playing ESO for a while, and the idea of sequels to the old stories is popular with a lot of players. What about the trial? It's really good. This probably won't be a surprise if you're into trials in ESO. I can only think of 2 potential blips on ZOS's 11-year record. Kyne's Aegis, which was the first trial they had to figure out how to build while working remotely during the pandemic. That was disappointingly easy when it launched, and Sanity's Edge, which is often compared unfavourably to the trials released either side of it. But that's partly because Dreadcell Reef, which came before, and Lucent Citadel, which came after, are both so fucking good and super popular with the player base. The point is, the track record of this team is unassailable. They make some of the best content like this in the industry, and from what I've seen of Ossian Cage, I don't think it's an exception. But that's all highly subjective. Everyone has their own favourite or least favourite trial, so let me just say how it compares. It looks cool as hell, and does a great job of making Cold Harbor look fresh and interesting, especially as you approach the end. It's not the first trial set in Oblivion, but Maw of Lorkhaj and Rockgrove only take us there in the final act, and Lucent Citadel is a sunken ruin in an abandoned wasteland of Oblivion. Ossian Cage, by comparison, is a hive, teeming with Daedra, and the art department went pretty crazy with some of the environments in a way that we really enjoyed on PTS. The trial is quite long, there's a lot of trash, and some of these pulls might be a slog for casual groups jumping in on Veteran. That might not thrill everyone, but it's nothing new, and personally, I kinda like it when even the trash pulls challenge groups to do some basic mechanics and bring some real power. The boss fights are also very theatrical. The first one is literally called the Hall of Fleshcraft, where chunks of flesh are sewn and conjured together to make flesh atronachs. It might be the grossest fight in the game. The second is like stumbling into a duel between 2 rival Daedra and all their minions and us getting caught in the middle. This one is absolute chaos the first time you try it. The final boss, Overfiend Caspian, is a very grand set piece with a lot of running, a whole bunch of mechanics to observe, and a pretty strong finale. Oh yeah, and all the boss fights take place on platforms that you can fall off, so watch your feet. For many ESO enjoyers, Ossian Cage is going to be reason enough to buy the content pass. Not just for the trial itself, but for the hours and hours of fun we're going to have with our friends in there over the coming months. If that's not you, if you just don't do trials that often, then it might not be such a compelling reason, because so far the sets from Ossian Cage don't look as though they're going to transform the meta. So basically, these 2 bits of content are the main reasons to get Seasons of the Worm Cult at this point, and it's probably an easy decision. If you love story or trials, you're most likely on board. But if you're just not bothered by either of those, then maybe you won't mind waiting until it all comes to ESO Plus next year. Of course, there's still Part 2, coming in November or whatever, which we don't know too much about, except that we'll cross into Eastern Solstice, where the Worm Cult have been busy, and the environment is gonna be a lot more bleak, corrupted, and generally fucked up, to use the technical term. That'll also include the second part of the story, and there's a good chance this will depict some pretty major events in the wider Elder Scrolls lore. Events which were first described in one of the books we could pick up and read in Oblivion 19 years ago. Pretty great timing with the remaster just having come out this year. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, I did make a video all about this and the history of the Worm Cult in general. It's linked right at the top of the description below. The thing is, we don't know what Part 2 is going to be like. We pretty much know what to expect from Zos at this point, but still, you don't quite know what you're paying for. Same with the Writhing Wall event, which is the big new thing we're getting this year, something Zos haven't done before. We still know frustratingly little about how this is going to work, but we do know it's coming in the early autumn, around the time of the next dungeon DLC, Feast of Shadows. It sounds like it'll be a bit like a world event, like a Dark Anchor, Harrow Storm, or a Miramor incursion, and maybe a bit like a siege in Cyrodiil as well. It will be stupidly large scale, involving every single player on the server in a single fight, obviously instanced, and it sounds like it could go on for weeks or even months, with different servers racing to get it done first. The ultimate goal is to bring down the wall and unlock Part 2 and the new zone in the east. And it looks like we'll progress towards that goal by defending these camps that have sprung up near the wall at various points on the island, defending against cultists and Daedra that come through the wall, building a massive siege weapon of our own, and pummeling that thing until it breaks. This could go either way. It could be a cool new system, but with boring gameplay, where all the defense and siege activities get old pretty fast and it turns into a grind, just like farming world events. But Zos must have taken inspiration from other games that have done stuff like this, and if they're getting really ambitious, this could be a real highlight of 2025 in ESO. I really don't know what to expect, but I think if there are some really cool rewards and big set-piece fights against really tough and giant bosses, that could be a ton of fun. Especially if the enemy attacks different camps at different times, and players have to redeploy to fight them off in the north, then the south, kind of like in Cyrodiil. If you're still on the fence about the content pass, maybe see what happens when this goes live, or at least until Zos give us more info, because this is the one piece of seasonal content that probably won't be repeated, at least not the chaos and fun of everyone doing it at the same time. Players who don't have the content pass when this goes live will still be able to contribute by doing activities in the base game zones, but obviously you can't join the front lines without access to the zone itself. That pretty much covers it. The Seasons of the Worm Cult content pass definitely offers some decent content, even if we don't know all the details yet, and in a similar format and cost to previous years. Zos said that we should expect more unconventional content and pricing from next year onwards. So if you didn't like the chapter format, you're probably not gonna like this one either. But if you did like the chapters and have been happy to pay for those in the past, this shouldn't be any different. It's just spread out. And if anything, it's slightly more generous this year because we get 4 dungeons thrown in as well, the first 2 of which are excellent. The Lepseclusa dungeon in particular seems to have been a pretty big hit across the board. So I guess that also counts in its favour. But if you have ESO Plus, you already have access to these dungeons, so owning them as part of the content pass won't matter so much. I hope this little preview and breakdown was useful, and before you go, please remember to support the channel if you can, whether that's a sub on Twitch or here on YouTube, or just by sharing our content with your friends and your community. We've also been streaming a lot more on Twitch recently, practically every day, so come and hang out with us there. Thank you to everyone who has supported us so far this year. And with that, I'll be back at you next time with a video guide on how to prepare for subclassing before it arrives in a few weeks, and a guide on how to get started with it when it launches on June the 2nd. Thanks for watching.